Hello and welcome to this video where once again we'll be looking at a CAT 2023 slot 1 reading comprehension passage. This video is only about reading of the passage. I'm not going to solve the questions or the exercises in this video. In a subsequent video, I'll discuss the questions related to this particular passage. I will link that video in the description. So if you have not read this passage yet, I will highly recommend that please go through this passage once, read it yourself, and then watch this video. It will give you a better sense of understanding as to what you're supposed to take away from this passage after finishing reading it for the first time. So this passage is about the geographic and non-geographic factors. So when we start reading from the first paragraph itself, the only piece of important information that we need to pay attention to here is the second line of the first paragraph, which says that things inside our culture, right, human phenomena and characteristics are influenced both by geographic and non-geographic factors. So that is what sets a precedent for what the author is trying to communicate. So the author is saying that multiple different things in human life are dictated by geographic factors and non-geographic factors. Then he goes on to explain in this first paragraph that what is the meaning of geographic factors, which of course geography is the study of Earth's locations and Earth's features. So when we talk about geographic locations or geographic factors, we are talking about factors that comes with the location of a particular area. And non-geographic factors, as the author is pointing out, is related to culture, to society, to history, historical occurrences, and what people make as decisions individually. So there are these two things which impact geographic factors and non-geographic factors put together. These two are the things that impact human phenomena and characteristics. Then moving forward, the author gives us two examples to show us that how these two factors work in developing human phenomena and culture and characteristics. So first, he gives us the example of North Korea and South Korea, and then talks about how the two different environments in these two different countries is not governed by geographic factors, but is a result of non-geographic factors. But then the author then gives us the example of Aboriginal Australia to make the counterpoint that how the specific practices of people of this particular region was completely determined by geographic factors, because the kind of animals and plants that exist there, people could not domesticate. Similarly, the author also gives us an example of the Arctic Circle and how the Inuits, by the way, Inuit is the correct term for Eskimos. I'm sure that all of us have studied in our school lives or read about Eskimos in our school lives. Eskimos is considered to be a derogatory term, so people don't use Eskimos anymore. Eskimos prefer to be referred as Inuits. So how the culture of Inuits, the practices of people who are living in the Arctic Circle, the practices of Aboriginal Australian people before colonization happened, before people brought domesticated plants and animals to that continent, how they led their life was completely a result of the geographic factors that dictated what people do there. So the author is giving us examples of both geographic factors and non-geographic factors, which have been major factors or major driving forces behind shaping human phenomena and characteristics. That is all that is happening in the first two paragraphs. The same point made in the first paragraph is being explained in a greater amount of depth using multiple different examples. Okay. Now comes the third paragraph, and from here onwards is where the author is specifically getting into the primary purpose, the motivation behind writing the passage. And they make it very clear in the very first paragraph that how scholars generally are okay with explanations for human phenomena, using cultural factors, using historical factors, using individual agent explanations, but are not okay with geographic role being the driving factors. And the author uses a term here, determinism, which can be a bit confusing. Let me explain what is the meaning of determinism or deterministic. Something is said to be deterministic when you can very accurately, absolutely with 100% accuracy, predict the output based on input. That if something happens, then something else will definitely happen. So if the cause is 100% determining what the effect is going to be, then the effort is deterministic. You can absolutely predict what the effect is going to be. So the author is saying that when people talk about cultural, historical, and individual agent as explanations for a particular phenomenon, then scholars don't announce it by saying that you cannot say that these things will absolutely determine, or using these factors, we can 100% determine what the output is. But unfortunately, when the same is done with respect to geographic factors, then several people say that, oh, geography cannot be deterministic. So geography cannot determine 100% of the outcome. There are multiple different factors that contribute to it. So this is what the author is having a problem with inside this passage, and that is the primary purpose of why the author has written the passage. So this is the first part of the passage where the author is presenting their opinion about the topic of discussion. Then the author is exploring that why, in the next paragraph, the author is exploring why people have such a nonsensical view, why people are not willing to accept geographic factors as the reason behind or the driving forces behind certain cultural phenomena and certain human phenomena. And there are three different reasons given to us in three different paragraphs. The first paragraph is talking about how explanations advanced a century ago were racist. So there were several different geographical explanations which were advanced a century ago that were racist. So people think that if we continue to give geographic factors as explanations, then that will be a very racist way of looking at it. And the author explains that why this is wrong is because there were many genetic, historical, psychological, and anthropological explanations advanced a century ago that were also racist. Yet the validity of newer non-racist genetic, etc. explanations is widely accepted. So people realize that we should not have racist explanations, but you can have non-racist genetic, individual agent driven or cultural or historical explanations. So when that is fine, why not look at non-racist geographic explanations for certain phenomena? That is the first problem that the author has with people who denounce geographic determinism or geographic factors behind the cause of particular phenomena. Second reason that the author gives is that the scholars always stress the role of contingency. Contingency means that if something does not happen, then what else can actually happen? So when you make a plan, you often make a contingency to the plan. So you say that I have plan A, but if plan A fails, I will have plan B. So plan B then becomes a contingency for plan A. So that is what the author is talking about, that the scholars have a favorite word called contingency, and they say that geographic factors, of course, cannot determine something 100%. So if it is not geographic factors, what else can it be? And then they say that there needs to be some other explanation as well. That's why they denounce geographic explanation for particular phenomena. But then the author is criticizing it with an example, saying that people in the Arctic Circle, Inuits living in the Arctic Circle, would not have worn fur because one person decided that they have to wear fur. It is definitely an environmental cause that has driven them to wear fur. So that is the second criticism that the author has for scholars who denounce geographic factors. And lastly, the third reason that the author is giving us is that many of these scholars depend or do not have a detailed sense of understanding of geography itself. Whereas understanding geographic factors as driving forces behind a lot of these phenomena requires them to understand geography in depth. Whereas mostly these scholars who denounce geography or geographic factors are historians and economists. This is what the passage is about. So at the end of reading the passage, what we have to understand is that the author believes that geographical factors might be the driving forces for natural phenomena or human phenomena as much as cultural or social or individual agent-driven factors. But there are several scholars, in fact, most scholars say that no, they are not as important. So for that reason, the author is criticizing those scholars. This is what the passage is about. Now, if you have understood this, what else can we take away from the passage? So few key takeaways from the passage is that the word count of this passage, although it looks a bit heavy, is actually only 481 words, one of the smallest CAT reading comprehension passages ever. Yet the passage is not very easy to read because there are multiple different examples which we might not relate to very culturally. There is also a very heavy sense of vocabulary used, and the text is also a bit heavy. Sentences are long. The author is trying to put forth both the for point as well as the against point together. So it will take a time to read the passage, even though it is a short passage. The type of passage is argumentative. Of course, the author is arguing against everyone who's saying that geographical factors are not important. And the source of this, unsurprisingly, is from a website called jareddiamond.org. And Jared Diamond is a UCLA professor of geography, right? So he definitely is advocating for why we should study geography, and he writes multiple different articles based on that. So he's on the side of geographic factors, of course. So the source makes absolute sense. I would say the ideal time to read this is more than 2 minutes because it's a heavy kind of a passage to read for sure. So a really good student should be able to finish reading it within 140 seconds, maximum 150 seconds. Acceptable time to read, I would say, is over 200 seconds. Even if you take 220 seconds, I put 210 here. 220 seconds is okay. 4 minutes is too long. If you take 240 seconds, then it's still a bit too long to read the passage. Overall difficulty level of reading of this passage is moderate. As I said before, pretty heavy passage, so moderate level difficulty. And the things to learn, I've already discussed the meanings of these words: determinism, deterministic models, then contingency. These are words which are very commonly used in several academic works, especially if you're reading any kind of statistical analysis, any kind of academic papers and journals. Then you'll find the usage of these words a lot, especially in fields like psychology, sociology, anthropology, statistics. So you should know the meanings of these terms, because routinely passages from such topics, academic passages from such topics, occur inside the CAT examination. So this is what we are supposed to take away from this passage.